is Dr. John McManus. He is the author of The Americans at Normandy, the Summer of 1944. Many of you know him by his recent trilogy about the Army in the Pacific. Some of you Marines in here would be shocked to learn that there were Army troops in the Pacific during World War II. I know you didn't see them there, but they were there. And John wrote all about that in a trilogy. We had him as one of our book talk speakers 3 or 4 months ago, and so we're glad to have him back. And he is also the Distinguished Professor of U.S. Military History at Missouri University of Science and Technology, and he came in to visit us for this event from St. Louis. So thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here today to talk about one of my favorite topics ever, D-Day. I mean, isn't it just incredibly compelling? I would have to say it's, the Normandy invasion is possibly the best remembered event of World War II from a Western point of view. It's just a momentous event in human history, and obviously the invasion is only the beginning of a much larger campaign to conquer Hitler's Germany. But its drama, I think it's fair to say, resonates with us, even today is one of the pivotal moments in world history, a kind of before and after moment. I think it's a major reason why we're all in this room today, that I think we're all incredibly drawn to it because I think we sense that, So from an American point of view, I would say it marks the beginning of the United States as an internationalist, world-leading superpower, the leader of an alliance at that point of like-minded Western states that will one day form the core of what becomes NATO. So in a way, you can see what's going to be NATO. You can see that on D-Day, and you can see a kind of a new America that's going to involve itself much more in European affairs than probably ever before, with the exception of World War I. So my remarks today focus primarily on the American experience, but I also want to emphasize that D-Day was a team effort with the participation of a dozen allied countries, all of whom played an important role. But this, too, is kind of a harbinger of that teamwork that becomes this alliance, but it demonstrates I would argue, the vital importance of alliances to United States security. The last sort of war of any size and consequence in duration that we fought without any major allies was the Spanish-American War in 1898. So I think when you step back and think about that, you get a sense of how important that is, that partnership that the United States has. And when you look at this from the context of World War II, of course, there's only one Western country that really has the wherewithal, the strength, to not just to lead the invasion, but especially the campaign that's going to follow. The invasion, the Americans are kind of a minority on invasion day, but in the campaign that's going to come, ultimately they are going to dominate about 2/3 of it in terms of the manpower, the firepower, the financial power, and to some extent the diplomatic power. So D-Day is kind of the harbinger of that. So of course then there's no doubt that for this massive enterprise of crossing the Channel and invading Hitler-occupied France, there's going to be an American commander. And there was a kind of consensus that this would be true, and obviously it's Dwight Eisenhower. In the West, of course, I think it's fair to say, too, the invasion was really the most heavily anticipated, iconic event of the war from the Western point of view, certainly not from the Soviet point of view. But the Western point of view, it was all about this before and after of when we get back to the continent. And it's the kind of event that if you lived through it, you kind of remembered where you were and what you were doing when you heard the news. Sort of like, later on or before with Pearl Harbor, or later on with the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or whatever it would be. So people participated in the spring of 1944 in betting pools all over the United States, like predicting the time and place of the invasion. Of course, they had no information on which to base this on, but it was fun to kind of speculate. On D-Day itself, the New York Stock Exchange paused for several moments and had a moment of silence and then read Eisenhower's order of the day. So I think that's kind of indicative, too, of just how hallowed and iconic this and anticipated this event was, that stock traders will actually pause from trying to make money for a couple of minutes, to think about the broader reality of this whole thing. Major League Baseball canceled all its games for the day on June 6, 1944. War industry shut down for the day, and Craig was talking earlier about the shipyards just working 24/7. And so when you think about that context of them shutting down production for an entire day, again, that tells you this isn't any ordinary day. This isn't any ordinary enterprise. Churches and synagogues, of course, were packed, and FDR famously broadcast a national prayer. So the story of D-Day begins, with the planning, obviously, as we've heard so eloquently today, and the preparation. And obviously, it had played out over the course of a couple of years of disagreements between the British and the Americans about our strategic orientation in Europe, if not necessarily any disagreement over priority for Europe. So the way this, of course, plays out, we've seen the twists and turns. But again, I would emphasize that the Normandy invasion is only possible when the United States is in a position to lead it and the campaign that will follow. Until we have that kind of situation, the Normandy invasion or any other invasion, cross-channel attack, whatever you want to call it, is simply not feasible in 1942 and 1943. In retrospect, then, I would say the British are correct. We don't have the shipping. We don't control the air. We don't have enough landing craft, specialized landing craft. We don't have the experience in amphibious operations. We don't have a trained-up army, and a U.S. army, that's going to fill out a lot of the manpower in order to liberate Western Europe. So when the United States is ready to lead, really, again, not just the invasion, but the campaign will follow, now that's when it's going to happen. And 1944 is that time. So the question then, of course, is where to invade. And, just to delve into that a little more deeply with you, I mean, when Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan, a British general, and he heads up a planning staff in the sort of the mid part of 1943, once it's pretty clear that there is going to be an invasion the next year, that they have to decide, okay, where in France will we invade? The logical place, of course, is Calais, as you can see from the map. Calais is so close to England. It's got a lot of really good landing beaches they're going to accommodate vehicles, especially heavy vehicles like tanks, bulldozers, and the like. Pretty good road net, has good harbors, and the thought for the planners, for a time at least, was that you were going to need really good, feasible harbors in order to supply and sustain your forces once ashore in Europe. This proved to be not quite 100% true, and of course the Mulberry Harbor is one reason, but really the other reason is LSTs and other craft that can be brought up to landing beaches to disgorge materiel and people. But initially Calais seemed the obvious place, but there were some serious downsides. Obviously it's heavily defended with the famous fortifications that we've all come to associate with the landings in France. But also the fact that the Germans might be able to see a lot of our buildup in southeastern England because Calais is so close to that part of England and to those narrow waters there. So Normandy is really kind of a second choice. It gives us a couple of key supply ports, Cherbourg and an inland harbor in Caen, and then smaller places like Port-en-Bazan and of course suitable landing beaches, a good landing coast. One advantage that Normandy has that Calais doesn't, because Calais, if you're going to land there, you're going to kind of go straight into Germany, and that's the idea, of course. But one advantage you've got is to be able to use Normandy as a pivot point to liberate much of France, including Paris. That you're not going to have to sort of sever and go beyond that and then worry about guerrilla operations behind you or the population starving or humanitarian situation there. You can liberate piece by piece as you go while still having air cover, while still having turnaround for your ships. So the game is, of course, in the spring of 1944, to keep the Germans guessing as to where and when. So just like the people who are engaging in the betting pools and all that, the Germans are doing much the same and trying to figure out exactly when it'll happen. So if the Germans know this information in an invasion that proposes a sort of continental littoral operation, ultimately, in campaign, they're going to have a great advantage because they're going to be able to move a lot of combat power to a narrow beachhead to perhaps snuff out and eliminate that beachhead, even if the Allies do control the sea and the air, which they do. So that's the concern, and Operation Fortitude is created along those lines to try and keep them guessing as to where and when. Famously, of course, the British Fourth Army, which is notional, is going to apparently invade Norway and hook up with the Soviets there and outflank the Germans from the north. More famously, Fortitude South proposes to fool them into thinking that the first U.S. Army group under Lieutenant General George Patton will invade at Calais. You know, you got all the cloak and dagger stuff and all that, and that yields some level of results to keep them guessing and tie down 15th Army even post D-Day. But I would argue really the bigger impact in terms of isolating the battlefield and the beachhead you're going to have in Normandy is really associated with air power. In the spring of 1944, the Allies are going to take a very difficult decision called the Transportation Plan, which is to unleash our four-engine bombers and other air assets to basically destroy a lot of the road net in northern France and pieces of Belgium, the railroads, the marshalling yards, and all that. Why is that a difficult step? Well, because these are friendly countries that you are liberating. You are talking about killing the people you are coming to liberate. And this is a very controversial thing. Churchill was dead set against it initially. And ultimately, they're going to consult the Free French, of course, to get their take on it, you know, quite appropriately, and they're going to sign off on it. But just because Charles de Gaulle's guys are for this doesn't mean everyone in France likes the idea of being bombed for this larger purpose of clearing the way for the invasion. So some 19,000 French and Belgian civilians are going to lose their lives in the months leading up to D-Day. And I really think it's important, especially for us as Americans, to step back and think about the price paid by the French and also the Belgians for their own liberation. Not just classically in the resistance movement and all that, but just everyday folks who are under the weight of these bombs. And then, of course, in the campaign that's going to come, their homes become a battleground. And this is the essential dilemma of the whole enterprise, that you're going to have to destroy much of what you're liberating. So the transportation plan sheds a light on that. It certainly yields results in terms of isolating the invasion area, the beachhead you're going to have in Normandy in the battlefield. It creates problems later on once you've broken out from Normandy and now are moving across France and Belgium, and the transportation and road net is in bad shape, and it's going to lead to supply and transportation issues then. But you do it one step at a time. You know, cross that bridge later. Well, here again, you can kind of get a sense of German fortifications and orientation in the months leading up to D-Day. And then we look closer to see the Allied landing plan itself, which is, of course, very famous now, but I think is worth taking a moment to go over. So you can see then the majority of the landing beaches are not American. You have two British beaches, codenamed Gold and Sword, that are going to sort of bracket their beach areas. And you can see they're going to land one division apiece at each of those. And then sandwiched in between is Juno Beach, where the Canadian 3rd Division is going to land. And I want to, you know, certainly mention them because, again, we're talking about a team effort. You talk about a country that's going max effort in terms of its support for the Allied cause and its importance for the Allied cause. The Canadian Navy had assumed a lot of the important roles in the Battle of the Atlantic. And, of course, here you're going to see the Canadian 3rd Division play a key role in the Battle of Normandy in taking on some of the most potent German armored reserves that are going to rack to the invasion. So the Canadian 3rd Division is sort of heavily equipped with anti-tank pieces and attached armor in order to achieve that mission, and is going to play a just absolutely vital role in this between the two British beaches. So those three beaches will link up, and then obviously farther to the west, you have the two American invasion beaches, Omaha Beach, which is the most famous, and then on the Cotentin Peninsula itself, Utah Beach, which, why are we doing that? Because we want Cherbourg as a key supply harbor, and we're going to invade Utah Beach, sever the Cotentin Peninsula, get Cherbourg, and then obviously join up the Utah and Omaha beaches. So if we look at D-Day in numbers, I hope that, yeah, okay. So if we look at D-Day in numbers here, I mean, you just sort of step back and get a sense of this. There's nearly 7,000 watercraft, and I express it that way because they're not all ships. Some of them are little landing craft, some of them are bigger LSTs. I mean, it's an enormous assemblage of naval hardware that is necessary for this. You have 11,590 aircraft, 156,000 amphibious troops. You see the plurality are American, but not the majority. You know, and that reflects the landing beaches themselves. You've got 6+ divisions scheduled to land on D-Day, and each of those divisions requires over 270,000 tons of shipping. Just to give you a sense, of how important, how vital shipping is to this entire thing. Everything has to be moved that way, except, of course, the airborne forces. Every bullet, every shell, every paperclip, every individual, every vehicle, there you have it. So one division alone occupying 30-plus ships just to carry them along over a relatively short span of water from England to northern France. For the U.S., you've got follow-on forces too, and I wanted to show you this map because it's the one they were looking at the time. And notice what it says, top secret bigot. Well, that was the code word that said you were briefed in on the whole secret of when and where in the Normandy invasion. I dare say we wouldn't use that word today as like the code word for this big operation. But back then, if you were bigoted, that meant you were briefed in on when D-Day was and all that. So odd, but maybe appropriate for 1940s America. But you look at the follow-on forces there, you can see, beyond the 1st and 29th divisions that are earmarked for Omaha Beach, you're going to land the 2nd Division, the 2nd Armored Division, the 30th Infantry Division, and the 3rd Armored Division. And over on Utah, you're going to land a regiment from the 90th Division, and then you've got the 9th Infantry Division, which is a very accomplished unit that's going to come into shore just as the initial follow-on forces. So again, think of how much shipping you're going to need for that, how much coordination, how much supply once ashore. It's just kind of staggering. So Allied soldiers are clustered into those sausages we've heard about, those marshalling areas in southern England as of late May 1944. So all over southern England, American soldiers are just simply there waiting for the word to go. The tension is just incredible, like this coiled spring. The diplomatic pouches and communications for many neutral countries have been shut down. There's this sort of larger anticipation worldwide of an invasion perhaps coming soon. The letters that you're writing are going to be, of course, heavily censored and held up, to be sent to your family back home or wherever when the military authorities think it's safe in terms of the security situation. No one gets in or out. So those sausages we were talking about, they're basically prisons on some level because there are armed guards outside the wire, usually armed with Thompson submachine guns and with orders not to let anyone in or out. And sometimes with orders that they are authorized to shoot to kill, though that doesn't happen a lot. So what are you doing if you're one of those soldiers just waiting for the word to go? Well, they're passing the time with card games, dice games, bull sessions. Some of them are watching movies. Some of them are playing sports, games of softball, impromptu games of football, just playing catch, whatever it would be. You're just burning off that energy. You're doing final preparations. How many times can you clean and check your weapon? Many people will sort of set records along those lines. I'll clean my rifle now for the 45th time today. It's certainly ready to go, right? If you have a vehicle, you're maintaining it. So you're just sort of burning the time, everybody waiting. When are we going? The food was just excellent in the sausages. Sometimes it was sausages, but even better food than that, prompting many fattening us up for the kill jokes. So here is Lieutenant Edward Jones, who was a recon soldier in the 29th Division, slated to land at Omaha Beach. The food was just the best. The finest any of us had seen or eaten since we had left the U.S. White bread, ice cream, steaks, chicken. Sort of get you hungry even before lunch, right? Jones and the others we're loving this food, but what does it really mean, Where are we going? Is this the last meal kind of thing? There's an enormous amount of tension, which led to fights, of course. These are young soldiers, after all. We've got final preparations, and it gets a little weird at times. So the 22nd Infantry Regiment was part of the 4th Division that was going to go ashore at Utah, and it was commanded by a guy named Colonel Russell Red Reader. Amazing guy. And one day a psychiatrist showed up, and he wanted to basically interview and examine every single guy in the regiment to see about their suitability to go to the invasion. And he's like, okay, you're just now doing this? And so he said, everyone's clear except for this one guy who I think is a psychopath. And Reader knew the guy and thought, I think he's going to be okay. And so he had to go to his division commander, Tubby Barton, Major General Raymond Barton, and say, hey, let's not siphon off any of our manpower here. And he gets it. But just weird stuff going on there. There are people antsy to get out of the sausages. And this is such a young soldier thing. Private Dwayne Burns and a buddy from F Company 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment escaped theirs, got past the guards, and they're walking somewhere like vaguely toward a pub when they encounter Brigadier General James Gavin, who's the second in command, the 82nd Airborne Division, who very politely steers them back to the sausage, says, no one's supposed to be out, guys. And they're only happy, that they didn't have in the stockade. There's a couple of very experienced NCOs in 1st Engineer Combat Battalion of the Big Red 1 or 1st Infantry Division who decide they're going to have this mastermind operation to go out and hook up with their British girlfriends, and especially after the delay over the weather and all that. And this seems to make sense to them, but obviously they're found out, and their captain busts them down, takes their stripes away, and he tells them, you know what, you just signed your own death warrant because you're going to be my runner, and I'm going in with the first wave. He was going in on a liaison capacity. The rest of his company of engineers was not, and indeed, one of them was killed on Omaha Beach. Some people, to go to the next slide, this guy had premonitions of death. This is Private Johnny Dahm, who was in B Company 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And, he was very morose. He was very quiet. He was just sort of staring into the distance. One of his buddies noticed this. He asked him what's wrong. And this was on June 5th. And Johnny said, I'm going to die tomorrow. And his buddy said, come on, some of us will, some of us won't. You ain't going to be one. Dahm would not be dissuaded from the idea. And unfortunately, he was right about the result, if not the timing. He was not killed on D-Day, but he was killed on June 8, 1944. So there were people who had these premonitions that actually came true. There were others, though, who had premonitions that did not come true, and there were, of course, many more who had no premonitions. But no one's more nervous, of course, than Eisenhower, who you see there in the middle. And, he's picked June 5th as the invasion date, quite famously, has to postpone it because of the weather. And I would argue one of the reasons that he's able to pull this off as well as he does is because the Allies have better weather information. Because of their victories in the Battle of the Atlantic, they have more weather stations that are feeding them better weather, including some on the western coast of Ireland, which was most pertinent to the storm system that was coming in that affects the invasion on June 5th. Okay, so Eisenhower is just, wound as tight as anybody. And on top of this, of course, you notice the man in blue there on the right, that's his air commander, Sir Trafford Air Marshal Lee Mallory. And of course, he's developed the idea that the airborne operations are going to be a complete disaster, and he's the two U.S. airborne divisions, and he's urging Eisenhower to basically scrub that part of the mission. So you're already under the stress of, oh, by the way, the most important invasion in human history, and, the war hanging on this, no pressure, though, and then on top of it, your air commander wants it on the record, I think this is a bad idea. So Eisenhower goes to Bradley. He goes to the two airborne division commanders, Max Taylor and Matthew Ridgway. He asks them about it, and they tell him, no, we simply have to do this because Utah Beach is not tenable unless we have these airborne drops with the two airborne divisions inland from Utah to secure the causeway. So he decides to go ahead, and, of course, then Eisenhower, being the kind of commander that he is, decides, I'm going to look these guys in the face if I'm really sending them all to their deaths. And remember, this is sort of the cream of some of the manpower of the United States Army. These are volunteers. They've gone through intense training to become parachute qualified or glidermen, because the gliders are a big part of these operations too. He's going to look them in the face, and here he is visiting soldiers from the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. And, in a way, it's to buck up his morale more than theirs. These are gung-ho young guys. Many of them don't necessarily know what they're getting into, and so Eisenhower, being Eisenhower, circulates around. He has this warmth about him, of course, which is part of his great strength as a commander, as a human being, this empathy that he's got. And he's chatting, he's grinning, he's commiserating. And then you have this, of course, one of the most famous images of D-Day. Here he is talking to the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, including Lieutenant Wallace Strobel there from Michigan. And it looks like Eisenhower's making this sort of important military point and whatnot. They're all hanging on his every word and all this. But by most accounts, they're talking fly fishing, So, because Strobel was from Michigan, I guess Eisenhower had been to Michigan fly fishing, and so he's talking about, casting the line there. So at another airfield, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wolverton, who was United States Military Academy class of 1938. He's from West Virginia. Was a battalion commander, 3rd Battalion, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 101st Airborne Division, or Screaming Eagles. And he and his guys gather in an orchard and listen solemnly to Wolverton a man that at this point they really love like a father. This is a really interesting insight into effective leadership, I think. Wolverton asked them to kneel and pray with him. And he asked them to look upward rather than downward as they prayed. And he said, God Almighty, in a few short hours, will be in battle with the enemy. We don't ask for savors or indulgence, use as instruments for the right and an aid to returning peace to the world. We only ask this: if we must die, we die as men would die, without complaining, without pleading, and safe in the feeling that we've done our best for what we believed is right. So after a few moments of these sort of prayerful reflections, the entire battalion rose as one and began to march to their planes, to head off for Normandy. And according to Sergeant Robert Webb, it was, quote, without a dry eye in the whole 760 men. This was the effect of Wolverton's talk that night. And another said, as he knelt and prayed, he could not have been more trusted and loved by the men in this battalion had he been the father of each one. I believe any of us would have followed him through hell. And I think that's such a poignant quote because that's exactly what they were about to do. Of all the airborne units dropped on D-Day, I think it's fair to say 3rd Battalion, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment drops into the worst circumstance, like almost right on top of a German unit, somewhere near Saint-Cloud-du-Mont. Unfortunately, Wolverton is killed in action instantly in his harness while hanging in a tree. This happens to many of his other troopers too. They're decimated. There's only about 100 to 180 guys, who are present for duty the next day. They're not all dead, of course, but it's really a tough situation. So we'll hear, of course, very eloquently later today, Dr. Mitch Yockelson about the specifics of the airborne drop. I just wanted to kind of show you a little bit of context in relation to Utah Beach. And each one of those little green dots that you see there represents an airborne stick, meaning a plane load of troopers that's dropped somewhere. So it's a scattered drop, largely because of the clouds and because of the German anti-aircraft fire. I think quite unfairly, for much of our sort of latter-day memory of D-Day, there's a sort of an opprobrium placed upon the transport pilots who are carrying the paratroopers and towing the gliders into Normandy, that they had scattered and gone away from their proper drop zones, that they had strayed in relation to this German fire and had led to these sort of chaotic drops that eventually happened. I view this as incredibly unfair, that there's a failure here. It's on the intel side of believing the German flak was gone, had been suppressed, and in the fact that it hadn't been destroyed in the first place by the aviators. Because the transport pilots are basically, in many cases, being asked to fly, to take on the aviation equivalent of on the ground charging into the muzzle of a machine gun. Okay, so you have to take evasive action. And the paratroopers they're carrying are going to be just as dead if all the planes are shot down. Okay, so they elect to take the better of a couple of bad options, which is, all right, let's deviate a bit here and there, let's scatter, let's take evasive action, let's drop these guys where they can, and then when they're on the ground, they'll do what they can. That's precisely, of course, what happens. The airborne drops may be scattered, but the paratroopers, especially here at Saint-Mary-Église and farther to the west at a key place called Lafayette and Saint-Cloud-du-Mont, are going to play a very important role in securing that entire western flank of Utah Beach, the causeways leading to the sea, and of course intruding upon German reinforcements, doing what I would say, very flippantly, what paratroopers do best: cause trouble. I mean, they do that extremely well in the Cotentin Peninsula, harassing German reinforcements and especially taking the town of Saint-Mary-Église. There's an interesting story in relation to that. A young trooper in the 505th Parachute Infantry, which drops north and in and around Saint-Mary-Église, a guy by the name of Private Ken Russell. And so Russell was from the Knoxville, Tennessee area, and he was 17 years old that night in D-Day. And he had left high school early to go join the Army, and he really wanted to be in this invasion. That's why he had left. And as he's, hooking up his line to jump, he's thinking to himself, oh my God, back home in Knoxville, my high school class is graduating at almost the same time. And you think about it, it's probably true. It's June 6th, it's graduation night back home, and it's about a 7-hour difference, or 8 hours, whatever it is. And so Russell thinks about that before he jumps into the Norman night, and of course he sees down on the ground all the tracers coming up, the things you've associated, especially if you've seen Band of Brothers. And so he's thinking to himself, oh Lord, they're jumping us into hell. And I think there was a lot of truth to that. He notices on the way down, one of his buddies, I think from his stick, is hit and just explodes. There's two others who descend into a burning building right in the heart of San Marigolese, which of course is where the Airborne Museum is now. And of course there's heavy fighting that happens on the ground. He ends up in near the San Marigolese church. So his experience is illustrative of so many others, of course, too, of just planned chaos on so many levels and doing the best you can once you're on the ground. So how is this relating then to Utah Beach? You can see the landing areas here. Now, they are supposed to land, you notice where it says 4th Division, that little symbol that you see there landing at Utah Beach. They're supposed to land about a mile to the north at San Martin to Varaville. There's a pre-invasion bombardment that consists of pounding from the warships, another vital role for the Navy on D-Day. Obviously, the heavier warships pounding and hopefully destroying targets before you can go ashore. But also, I would argue, the most effective application of air power on D-Day, the lower altitude bombing raids from medium bombers, from twin-engine bombers here at Utah Beach. The planes had a reasonable success at destroying German guns and beach fortifications at Utah Beach. They dealt with plenty of opposition, though. Flak. We went through the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft fire I had yet seen, Lieutenant Alan Stevens, the 397th Bomb Group said. Tracers and flak explosions were so thick that it looked impossible to get through without being hit. In spite of this heavy fire, the aviators unleashed a torrent of devastating bombs, most within a quarter mile of their targets, most being, just over the majority, I guess I'd say. The bombs carpeting the target are bursting like bubbles in a vat of nitric acid, another aviator wrote in his diary that day. There are spouts of flame and belching smoke, which seem to leap at us like some angry monster writhing horribly. It's terrible in its sheer destruction. So the ships are firing, of course, their support as the sun rises on D-Day, in H hour 6:30 on the American beaches. And so finally it's time for the amphibious troops of the 8th Infantry Regiment, 4th Division, to hit the beach. Now, they've been aboard their landing craft, famously Higgins boats, but other kinds of landing craft, probably for about 2.5, almost 3 hours in some cases. So you're circling around in the water. You can imagine, you're going back and forth. You're packed together with these other guys. You're wet. Some of them are seasick. Some of them are frightened out of their wits. They're bored, too. They're anticipating. They've been training for this for months. This is sort of the key moment. They're packed in like lemmings, and they're sort of loaded for bear. So one of the biggest perils you've got, if you're one of these guys, is striking mines. The minesweepers, the Navy minesweepers, have done a remarkable job of clearing the way for the larger invasion fleet, Force U, that's going to hit Utah Beach. But you couldn't get all the mines in that short period. So there's still some floating around the area, and of course they inflict casualties. One LCT hit a mine and said, this is a first-hand account, I saw tanks blown 50 to 100 feet in the air. They tumbled as if they were flipped matchboxes. The LCT was broken in two. German artillery and machine gun fire from the coast only added to the disarray. Smoke and dust hugged the coast, making it difficult for the coxswains to figure out where they were and where to land people. All of this, in addition to tides that were going southwestward, combined to mean that the 8th Infantry is landed about a mile too far south at La Madeleine rather than, as you see, the original landing spot. So what happens when you do land? Well, this is Private Fred Crum, the 8th Infantry, said, we moved off as quickly as the weight we carried permitted. Each step seemed as though a ball and chain had been tied to our ankles. More on that now. You're carrying anywhere between 60 and 110 pounds of stuff as you're going ashore. Great American tradition of overloading our guys once they're in combat. Those of you who have been in that situation can totally relate, right? So here you are, wet, that only adds to it, amped up, so Crum and the others are just sort of staggering ashore on some levels and doing the best they can. We waded through 3 feet of water and charged a house, firing through the door. We heard shouts. One of our soldiers kicked in the door so I could throw a grenade inside. 10 to 15 Germans came out with their hands up to become prisoners. That's Private Bill Conrad, E Company 8th Infantry. So the enemy soldiers who are there, some of them are ethnic Germans, some are ethnic Georgians, not from our state of Georgia, but from the country of Georgia that's part of the Soviet Union. And what that's about is a lot of Eastern European roster filler in the German armed forces here, probably about 20% or so, that have been given the option. You want to be worked as a slave labor or be coerced into the German military? And the answer is very obvious for many of them. So some of them end up here, including some Georgians at Utah Beach and some other Eastern Europeans. So some are ethnic Germans and some are fighting, some are not. Some had been flushed out by the pre-invasion air bombardment, which is quite effective. The sea bombardment, not as much, because it doesn't go on long enough. But the landings are going well, but there's a real problem. They're in the wrong place, and what matters is those causeways, those beach exits you see there. There's 4 of them. The 2 of them are up at Les Dunes de Varaville, and so that's where your follow-on forces are supposed to go, all your vehicles and stuff. Most of the land around them is flooded. So you need the causeways for vehicles. Infantry can move through the flooded areas really uncomfortably, but they can do it. The vehicles can't, of course. So where you've landed at La Madeleine, there's only one causeway that you have right now, so you could possibly funnelize and choke point everything, and the Germans maybe could come and kind of annihilate you in that kind of one little funnelized area there. So the person who has to make the call about what to do next is this guy, Brigadier General Ted Roosevelt, who is just this sort of supernumerary general officer attached to the 4th Division who has persuaded Barton to let him go in with the first wave. Roosevelt, of course, is the son of the president of the same name. He is highly combat experienced by this point. He had led troops in World War I. He'd been badly wounded in World War I with a leg wound. You see him with a cane there. So he's 56 years old on D-Day. He had been the assistant division commander of the 1st Division in the Mediterranean. And so here he is going ashore with the initial assault troops because he feels if they see this old man hobbling around, they're going to figure it can't be too bad, right? And it'd be good for morale. So he's right about that, but it's also quite fortuitous that he's there on the spot because he has excellent judgment. He's really courageous. He has a way with soldiers. He's very down to earth. He's a guy who's really been there, done that. And so he combines with another quite remarkable leader, the commander of the 8th Infantry, Colonel James Van Fleet, who many of you have heard of. He becomes a 4-star general eventually, is the commander of the 8th Army in Korea and all that. So Van Fleet and Roosevelt have to decide, all right, are we going to land the follow-on forces here or go back to Les Dunes de Varaville? How do we handle this? And ultimately Roosevelt decides, okay, let's just land here. And he makes the famous statement, we'll start the war from right here. And it's the right call, but it means moving around all day, organizing, coordinating, inspiring, motivating, shall we say, the nicest way that I can, getting people through that causeway and expanding to the other one farther to the south, and coordinating 1,700 vehicles and 20,000 troops that are going to be ashore by nightfall. So the paratroopers have run interference extremely well to the west, and they're going to link up with the 4th Division guys getting off the beach on those causeways, and they'll advance within about a mile or so of San Marc-Lees by the night of D-Day. The Americans suffer 197 casualties at Utah Beach. Roosevelt, of course, receives the Medal of Honor. He's one of 4 D-Day American D-Day recipients. So, this was not easy. It was not bloodless. Most of those casualties are from artillery. There's going to be a problem in the following days. Well, of course, famously, the worst of the fighting happens at Omaha Beach, right? And the Allied planners knew that this was going to be the toughest go. It's a 4.5-mile stretch. Let me give you a sort of latter year look at it. And of course, there's much more foliage in this latter year than you would have had on D-Day. You've got clear fields of fire the Germans have cut. But what you're looking at here is Omaha Beach from its extreme eastern end at what's called WN 60. The WNs were Widerstandsnest, German strong points designed to guard the draws, the ravines, the natural ravines that were the obvious place that you'd get off that beach. Okay, so you're looking here at the entire expanse from east to west, and notice the crescent shape. 4.5 miles of crescent with a kind of fish in the barrel effect of looking down on whoever lands there and being able to give bracketing or enfilading fire, sometimes plunging fire, right down on them. So for this purpose, the Allies are going to earmark 2 divisions to go ashore, the 1st and the 29th, of course. One quite heavily combat experienced in the Mediterranean. The other, a National Guard unit, brand new to combat. but training in England for about a year and a half, very much trained to a fine edge. And of course, the 29th Division is going to hit the western part of Omaha Beach, the 1st Division, the eastern part. So General Bradley felt that heavy bombers, the 4-engine bombers of the 8th Air Force, could really pulverize the German defenses on Omaha, which were the most formidable in Normandy, arguably, and were getting more formidable by the day. He thought, all right, they'll blast the pillboxes, create bomb craters, smash the path through the German defenses. Well, no, this didn't happen. Really ineffective. Most of the bombs land inland, famously, all that. The naval bombardment lasts all of 45 minutes. Why? Because the element of surprise. You don't want to be there 3 days bombarding, or they'll know what's about to happen, right? So that's all you can do. So bottom line, when you hit the beach at Omaha Beach as an American assault troop, you are basically facing an intact beach that the Germans have fortified. So the purpose of all this, how you're going to do it, is a combined arms assault. Tanks, anti-aircraft gunners, engineers, and infantry are all going to come ashore and do their thing and present the about 1,500 or so Germans who are defending this place, and most of them are ethnic Germans, present them with too many targets, and you'll land in the dead spots in the Widerstands nests, and you'll overwhelm them, and you'll work around and through the draws, you'll outflank them, you'll destroy them, and you'll plunge inland, and you'll do it that way. But what happens instead, of course, people landing piecemeal, people landing in the wrong spot, the tides are tough, the smoke and the dust and the mist and the confusion, and so what happens instead is that the assault forces at Omaha Beach are going to land piecemeal, sometimes in the biggest kill zones, piece by piece, to where the Germans can focus on them one at a time. Most famously, of course, on the western end, in the Dog Green sector, which A Company of the 116th Infantry, 29th Division, is just absolutely decimated. Those are the famous Bedford Boys, which 19 are killed on D-Day. On the eastern side of it, you have E Company and F Company, 16th Infantry, that lands in the kill zone below WN62, which you see there on the map, which is really possibly the most powerful fortifications on Omaha Beach. And so they're caught in this plunging fire right down in the worst place you want to be. You've got leaders getting killed instantly, sometimes by snipers. You have people being blown to pieces. PFC Norman Speckler is one example I'd give you, a tragic example. He's got TNT explosives on him. He's hit, and he literally blows to pieces all over Omaha Beach. You've got gap assault teams that are combined Army, Navy engineers, because the place is so fortified with obstacles and mines that the planners decide we need a lot of engineers to deal with this. So 1 out of every 4 soldiers who goes ashore at Omaha Beach on D-Day is an engineer. So they're trying to blow holes in areas through the gap, like gaps through the mines and obstacles, and they're also just getting decimated. They're mixed in with the infantry. Infantry are taking cover behind a lot of the obstacles, which means you can't blow them up then, obviously. You're talking about 50% casualty rates in many of the gap assault teams between the Army and the Navy engineers. It is just a mess. The tanks are getting nailed at the waterline. Some of the tanks, of course, the amphibious tanks famously sink on their way in. That happens in the 1st Division sector. 27 out of 32 tanks sink there with a average loss of 1 crewman per tank. And I just want to give you, though, as a sort of working toward a welcome conclusion to this, a couple of examples of why and how the Americans get off the beach and prevail here. So what you're looking at here is where a lot of guys are by an hour and a half into the assault. Pinned down on what here is called the shingle bank. It's like a raised embankment of stones, and where it seems like you're safe because there's not as much small arms fire, but you can imagine how deadly that is when the mortar rounds come in, the artillery rounds, all this kind of stuff, which is really the deadliest thing at Omaha Beach. So you're pinned down there, and you've got some other groups, though, including the second guy from the right, Lieutenant John Spaulding, that's going to land actually in the right spot and start to move inland to flank around some of the German defenses and destroy them from within. Spaulding is in charge of a boat section of 32 guys. He is ably assisted by this man, Tech Sergeant Phil Strasik, who has heavily combat experience in the Mediterranean. And if you'd taken a poll in the 1st Division, On the eve of D-Day, who is the most courageous soldier in this division, he would have gotten a lot of votes. So Strisek has heavily combat experience. He comes from a hard Scrabble background, a Polish-American family in New Jersey. He'd had to leave school to work during the Depression to help support the family, and the Army had become kind of a professional home for him. Spalding is 29 years old, a former sports writer leading troops on D-Day, seeing his first combat. So here they have this interesting leadership mix of the new lieutenant in charge with the highly experienced combat sergeant who is going to help guide this whole thing. 32 guys in the section who land kind of right in the heart of, right between WN 62 and 64 there. Right where they're supposed to. It's not an easy landing because they're coming in with tough tides and water. Some of them come close to drowning. The area's under mortar fire, but you found a gap in the German defenses. Notice how the defenses are oriented toward the ravines or beach exits, all of which are just sort of natural gullies that still exist today. So this gap, which these guys, the Spalding section lands in, whereas the most of their company is over right under the snout of WN 62 getting decimated. Spalding, Strisek, and the 30 others land sort of in the middle of that, and then they move straight ahead. They blow a path through the barbed wire and mines with what are called Bangalore torpedoes, which another sergeant does that, but under Strisek's supervision. But Strisek finds sort of routes through the mines, because the way the Germans have covered the gaps in their fortifications is mines in that kind of high ground and gaps and swales and little indentations and ridges and all that. There's all these mines in there, and Strisek is figuring out where they're going to be and where they're not going to be. So there's a path off the beach that he is going to help lead. These guys will fight towards WN 64 and nail it in the course of the day, and that saves the lives of a lot of follow-on forces who are coming in the course of that day. So they suffer casualties, 2 killed, 8 wounded. 7 of the men received the Distinguished Service Cross for their actions on D-Day, including Strisek and Spalding, who both survived. Another group under this guy, Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith, is going to land farther to the east near WN 60. Monteith had seen combat in Sicily. He was a highly experienced platoon leader. He was very well respected in his unit. He had attended Virginia Tech earlier in life, had not graduated. He wasn't much of a student. He had, although his family had this tradition of going to Virginia Tech, so he felt badly. I didn't do very well there. I played around, that kind of thing. But he finds his sort of maturity in the Army as a small unit leader. Monteith sort of famously leads a couple of tanks off the extreme eastern edge of Omaha Beach near WN 60 to kind of hook around and come after, if we go back, you get to see where WN 60 is, hook around towards that beach exit there, and it's a remarkable thing because it's under heavy fire much of the day, and then his platoon is going to play a major role, and others too, from L Company and other units from 3rd Battalion, 16th Infantry, are going to play a major role in gnawing away at the effectiveness of WN 60 because that secures some of that eastern flank of Omaha Beach. Late in the day, of course, as the Germans react to this, they're trying to launch counterattacks. Monteith's platoon is right in the midst of one German counterattack. He is basically leading his people, moving from hedgerow to hedgerow. Notice the importance of that now. Hedgerows in the mix, and that's a harbinger for the future. He is killed in action by a German machine gun. He gets a posthumous Medal of Honor. Last guy who I would just point to is playing a major role, but for everyone I'm telling you here, there are dozens, maybe hundreds more we don't know about. Colonel George Taylor is the commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment, and so he's coming in about an hour and a half after H hour, in the middle of all this chaos. His XO had been killed in action instantly at H hour, John Huey Matthews. His headquarters is in some level of disarray. And, of course, there's a famous saying associated with Omaha Beach. Only 2 kinds of people are going to be on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now get the hell off the beach. Unfortunately, in the longest day, those words have been put in the mouth of a different person, Brigadier General Norman Dutch Coda, the 29th Division. Taylor said them, and Taylor wrote them. It's one of the things I found in my research. He wrote them in a memo like 5-6 months before D-Day. So this idea was very prevalent in his mind. Taylor plays a twofold role on D-Day. He gets a lot of people off the shingle bank, you see, where they were taking cover, which really saves a lot of lives. and creates a hunter kind of thing. When you're an American soldier on Omaha Beach, you're a target. When you're moving inland like that, you're a hunter. Second part, once you do that, it reinforces the Streisiks, the Spaldings, the Montes of the world who have gotten that inland penetration so they won't be cut off. This plays a major role in animating the American momentum that gets off Omaha Beach on D-Day. Taylor, too, will get the Distinguished Service Cross. By nightfall, your situation is this. You've got a beachhead. It's been a close-run thing, but you've gotten the beachhead. You've also, I want to point out, too, one of the reasons you have is U.S. Navy destroyers coming in to provide close-in support. USS Carmick, USS Harding, Frankfurt, to name a few. And all that has combined to allow you to get ashore with about 35,000 troops and hundreds of vehicles at the cost of 2,500 casualties, roughly evenly split between the two divisions. So, D-Day as a whole, the Allies suffered 10,000 casualties, including 4,426 deaths. 2,509 of them are Americans, and that's the deadliest day for the U.S. in World War II. We know this because of the remarkable work at the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia, which many of you have visited, I know, a necrology project to document exactly just this. So if you're ever wondering about the Allied cost of victory on D-Day, that's it. So to conclude, D-Day is only the beginning. First step in this long process. It doesn't guarantee victory, but it makes it highly likely. For the U.S., if we're stepping back looking at it that way, it's the beginning of world leadership. It's the beginning of this campaign in Northwest Europe and later on in the Cold War, in which the United States will be in the lead to protect and secure European freedom. So D-Day for the United States is this kind of seminal moment. It's actually the beginning of an internationalist, militarily powerful, world-leading U.S., and it's one committed to shedding its own blood for the security of Europe on this day, and of course many subsequent days, and really eventually as a member of NATO. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, we have time for a few questions, so if you want to raise your hand, we've got some folks around with microphones. I'll go to Keith first.
Thank you very much for that very informative and inspiring presentation. Question, and we talked about this briefly, and you've written a lot about the Pacific, just amazing books about the Pacific, the trilogy. But what were the lessons learned from the Pacific and the earlier landings like Sicily? I know the Sicily airborne operation was problematic, shall we say, but how were some of the lessons learned, or were lessons learned from the Pacific incorporated into the D-Day landing?
Yeah, I mean, I've often said that they probably could have and should have learned more lessons from the Pacific especially, but maybe Sicily too. One lesson they could have learned from Sicily is that they didn't necessarily need amphibious tanks. That you could bring in wader tanks that could drive through about 10 feet of water or so and could be landed from landing craft with no problem. Those are the tanks that largely get ashore intact, like at Omaha Beach, for instance, on D-Day, but also to some extent for the 70th Tank Battalion at Utah Beach, too, and for the British on their beaches. And in terms of the other lessons learned, I think maybe better coordination with the Navy, and I think that's really one oversight here. Maybe oversight isn't the right word, but it's not as far along as it should be, considering the importance and elaborate nature of this invasion. There's some level of frustration by some in the Pacific that maybe some of the lessons they've learned haven't been translated toward this. Charles Corlett is an example. He commanded the 7th Infantry Division at Kwajalein a few months before D-Day. He'd been redeployed to Europe as a corps commander, and he's trying to say, hey, here's how we work really well with navies, where we assign a specific destroyer to a specific battalion that they're going to work together quite intimately. And he doesn't think he's getting the sort of right kind of response from General Bradley at the First Army level. I don't know that it's 100% fair, because I think General Bradley is thinking through a lot of this, but I think there could have perhaps been a better translation there. But there were other avenues that were available to you, especially as a small unit commander, because there were these sort of pamphlets that the Army is publishing during the war of all sorts of lessons learned for all kinds of things, where people were giving their firsthand experience on Guadalcanal or Kwajalein or in Sicily or wherever. So there were ways to learn it, but it wasn't maybe as formalized as it could have been.
Thank you, Dr. McManus, for your presentation as well. It's my understanding that on the morning of D-Day, the 116th was actually attached to the 1st Infantry Division. And I read in your book that General Hubner came in and he made a lot of changes, seeing that there were refinements that needed to be made to the Big Red One, namely in terms of discipline and other shortcomings. But that being said, have you come across anything? How much attention did General Hubner pay to the western half, to the 116th on D-Day?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of the really confusing aspects of D-Day at Omaha Beach is that you've got two divisions there, but one of them is sort of under the control of the other. So the two lead assault regiments for the 29th Division, the 116th and 115th Infantry, are going to be directly, like OPCON, controlled by the 1st Division. General Hubner has a broad view of the whole Omaha Beach, in terms of the planning, in terms of the implementation. But unfortunately, General Hubner doesn't play much of a role on D-Day. He is like a caged tiger aboard ship wanting to get aboard shore or get ashore because, he's out of touch with what's actually happening in the chaos of the moment. He's not alone in that. General Bradley is to some extent too. And General Giro, the 5th Corps commander, both divisions are part of. But the whole 29th Division being attached to the 1st thing is just a sort of way to kind of streamline the organizational structure on D-Day itself. Of course, they'll go their separate ways soon thereafter. But yeah, Hubner is really interesting in that I think he plays a key role in the success at Omaha Beach in preparing the Big Red One especially for what they're going to face. But on D-Day itself, curiously enough, he's marginalized until about early evening when he can actually get ashore. It's a small unit leader's fight for the most part, with the exception of 2 general officers, Coda and then Willard Wyman, who is Hubner's assistant division commander.
What was the logic of stacking all of the Airborne behind Utah, leaving Omaha completely open?
Yeah, it's a great question that I get a lot. The Airborne role is so crucial in Cotentin of capturing the western end of those causeways that in some ways you only have so much manpower to devote to that. And it's going to take the better part of 2 Airborne divisions, not just for that side, but if we look westward to secure the causeway, say, at Lafayette and Chef DuPont over other flooded terrain, that you're going to need them to clear the way for that. The other factor, too, is that inland from Omaha Beach is not particularly good landing zones. It's some pretty heavy bocage country that leads to Saint-Lô. But the other thing, too, that I didn't even mention at all, the role of the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions in securing the terrain in between at Pointe du Hoc. They are already playing the role that Airborne might have under a different circumstance to help out the landings at Omaha Beach. But yeah, in retrospect, I mean, let me add one point. General Marshall had this concept of landing multiple airborne divisions like 50 miles inland, to create this little enclave, Allied enclave there, and Eisenhower kind of politely steers away from that whole thing. So if we sort of retrograde from that, this would take you to Omaha Beach of support for 5th Corps too, but it is just considered, at least by Eisenhower's people, to be not wise or feasible enough.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to say thanks to John again, and that'll be our last question. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Okay.